It all began 3 weeks earlier with a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. The heavy cardstock felt expensive between my fingers as I pulled out an elaborate invitation. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Ashley and Michael," it read in elegant script. The wedding would be hosted in the backyard of none other than Karen Williams, our homeowners association president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator. I studied the invitation with mild surprise. Karen and I were not friends. In fact, we barely spoke except during tense HOA meetings where she routinely shot down any suggestions that did not originate from her inner circle. Our interactions consisted mainly of her pointing out supposed violations on my property. My garbage can visible from the street for more than 12 hours, my grass allegedly half an inch too tall, or my holiday decorations not meeting her arbitrary standards of taste. The day after receiving the invitation, Karen herself appeared at my door. She stood on my porch with that familiar tight smile that never reached her eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an immaculate bun, not a strand out of place. She wore her HOA pin prominently on her blazer lapel like a sheriff's badge. "I just wanted to make sure you received the invitation to Ashley's wedding," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "It is going to be the event of the season in our little community." "Yes, I got it. Thank you for thinking of me," I replied politely, though confused by her sudden interest in including me in her daughter's special day. Karen clasped her hands together. "Wonderful. Now, I just wanted to personally remind you that we will need absolute quiet from neighboring houses during the ceremony. No lawn mowing, no music, no gatherings of your own." Her tone hardened slightly. "Also, please make sure any guests you might have that weekend do not park on the street in front of my house. We need to maintain a certain image for the wedding photos." I raised an eyebrow. I was not planning to have anyone over that weekend. "Excellent," Karen nodded approvingly. "The ceremony starts at 2 o'clock, but do arrive by 1:30. Oh, and wear something appropriate." Her eyes scanned my casual at-home attire with thinly veiled judgment. After she left, I looked at the invitation again. The date coincided with a family emergency I had been dealing with. My father's health had been declining, and I needed to take him to a specialized medical appointment that same day. It would require driving him across town and back. Access to my driveway would be essential. The next morning, I called Karen to decline the invitation. She did not answer, so I left a detailed voicemail explaining my situation and expressing my best wishes for her daughter's wedding. I followed up with a text message to ensure she received the information. 2 days passed before Karen responded, not with a call, but with a text that read, "Sorry to hear you cannot make it. Please remember this is a significant event for the entire neighborhood. Your participation would have helped boost community image and property values." I stared at my phone in disbelief. She had somehow turned my absence from her daughter's wedding into a property value issue. Classic Karen. The week before the wedding, notices appeared on everyone's doors reminding residents about noise restrictions and parking regulations for the community event. Though the wedding was private, Karen had leveraged her HOA position to essentially place the entire neighborhood under special rules for her daughter's celebration. I focused on preparing for my father's appointment, arranging everything carefully to ensure we could leave on time and return without complications. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, mild temperature, birds singing. Nature had conspired to give Karen her picture-perfect day. That perfect morning shattered when I stepped outside my front door at 9 o'clock. There, blocking my driveway completely, sat a gleaming white Lexus that did not belong to me. I approached the vehicle with growing anger and spotted a handwritten note tucked under the windshield wiper. I plucked it free and read, "Hope you do not mind, we need the space. Karen." She had not asked, she had not called. She had simply taken what she wanted, my private property, and left a note as if that made everything acceptable. I immediately pulled out my phone and called her number. No answer. I texted her, "There is a car in my driveway. I need it moved immediately. I have an important appointment today." 20 minutes passed. No response. I called again, straight to voicemail. I sent another text explaining the urgency of the situation. Finally, my phone buzzed with a reply. It was a laughing emoji, nothing more. My blood pressure rose as I stared at that mocking emoji on my screen. This was beyond inconsiderate. It was deliberate. I looked across the street where preparations for the wedding were in full swing. Workers carried chairs and tables into Karen's backyard. Florists arranged elaborate displays along the walkway. A catering van had just pulled up and was unloading equipment. I decided to address this directly. Walking across the street with determined steps, I approached Karen's house and tried to locate her among the bustle of wedding preparations. A man in a blue polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, Thomas, Karen's deputy and loyal follower, intercepted me before I could reach the backyard gate. "Can I help you?" he asked, positioning himself squarely in my path. "I need to speak with Karen immediately," I said. "She has parked her car in my driveway without permission, and I need it moved right away." Thomas's expression remained impassive. "Karen is extremely busy with wedding preparations. Is this really something that cannot wait until tomorrow?" "No, it cannot wait," I insisted. "I have an important medical appointment for my father today. I specifically told Karen about this when I declined the wedding invitation. I need my driveway clear now." Thomas sighed dramatically as if I were being unreasonable. "Let me see what I can do." He disappeared through the gate, leaving me standing on the sidewalk like an unwelcome solicitor. Several minutes passed before Karen emerged, holding a clipboard and wearing a headset. Her face was flushed with the excitement of the day, but her expression hardened when she saw me. "What is so urgent that you need to interrupt my daughter's wedding day?" she demanded. "Your car is blocking my driveway," I stated plainly. "I need it moved immediately. I have my father's medical appointment today." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "It is only for a few hours. We needed the extra space for the wedding party to park. You should be honored to help make this special day possible for the community." "The community," I echoed in disbelief. "This is a private event and that is my private driveway. You cannot just take it without permission." Actually, Karen's voice took on that condescending tone I had heard countless times at HOA meetings. "As HOA president, I can authorize temporary usage of spaces for community benefit. The board voted on it." When? There was no meeting notice, no vote I was aware of. "Emergency session," she replied smugly. "Perfectly legal under our bylaws." I noticed several neighbors watching our exchange from their porches. They looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Karen had cultivated a culture of fear in our HOA. Cross her, and you would find yourself buried in violation notices and fines. "I will move the car after the ceremony," Karen said with finality. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a wedding to organize." She turned and walked away, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. I returned home, fuming but determined to verify her claims. I pulled out my copy of the HOA charter and bylaws, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. For the next hour, I carefully read through every section, every clause, searching for anything that would grant the HOA president authority to commandeer a private driveway. There was nothing, not a single provision that allowed for such an action. Even the emergency session powers were limited to common areas and did not extend to private property. Armed with this knowledge, I filed a formal complaint through the HOA website, citing the specific sections of the bylaws that Karen had violated. Almost immediately, I received an automated response. "Thank you for your submission. The board will review all complaints at the next scheduled meeting on the 15th of next month." I checked the calendar. That was 3 weeks away. By then, this would be ancient history. Karen had manipulated the system to delay any consequences until long after her daughter's wedding. Meanwhile, my car remained trapped in the garage. I called my father to explain that we would have to reschedule his appointment. The disappointment in his voice crushed me. This was not just an inconvenience. It affected his health, his well-being. The specialist had a waiting list of months. Missing today meant potential delays in his treatment plan. I stood at my window, watching the white Lexus gleaming in the sun, parked illegally in my driveway. Karen had crossed a line, and for the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt something harden within me. This was not just about parking anymore. This was about power, boundaries, and respect, and I was done being the quiet, compliant neighbor. By noon, guests began arriving for the wedding. Men in suits and women in flowing dresses filed into Karen's backyard. The sight of them casually walking past my house, glancing at the Lexus in my driveway as if it belonged there, only fueled my determination to resolve this situation. I searched online for local towing companies, finding one with excellent reviews for prompt service. I called and explained my situation to the dispatcher. "So the vehicle is parked in your private driveway without permission," the dispatcher clarified. "Correct," I confirmed. "I have documentation showing it is my property, and I never gave consent for anyone to park there." "We can send a truck within the hour," she said. Then she paused. "Wait, did you say this is in Oakwood Heights? Is this related to the HOA president's daughter's wedding?" My stomach sank. "Yes, actually, how did you know?" "We received a notice from your HOA yesterday stating that there would be special parking arrangements for a community event. They specifically mentioned that any towing requests in your neighborhood today should be verified with the HOA office first to avoid confusion." Karen had thought of everything. She had anticipated my response and preemptively blocked it. "But this is my private driveway," I insisted. "The HOA has no jurisdiction over that." "I understand, sir, but we have to be careful with HOA disputes. They can create complications for our business. Perhaps you could resolve this through your association first." The call ended with a stalemate. The towing company would not intervene without clear documentation that I had the right to remove the vehicle, documentation beyond just my word against the HOAs. As I pondered my next move, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was an HOA-wide message from Karen herself. "Dear valued community members, it has come to my attention that certain individuals are attempting to disrupt today's community celebration by making false claims and threatening action against guests' vehicles. Please be advised that the board has approved all parking arrangements for today's event, and any interference will result in immediate fines for disrupting community harmony. Let us all work together to make this a beautiful day for Oakwood Heights. Karen Williams, HOA President." I stared at the message in disbelief. She had not only blocked my attempts to resolve the situation, but had now painted me as the villain to the entire neighborhood. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. As the afternoon progressed, more guests arrived, and soon the street became lined with parked cars. They filled every available space, some partially blocking fire hydrants, others extending into neighbors' driveways. The situation was growing beyond just my personal inconvenience. It was becoming a safety hazard. When I noticed a car parked in a way that narrowed the street to barely one lane, I grabbed my phone and began recording. I walked along the row of improperly parked vehicles, documenting license plates and positions relative to driveways and hydrants. If Karen wanted to play with documentation, I would create some of my own. I was in the middle of recording when I heard sirens in the distance. An ambulance was trying to navigate through our neighborhood, likely headed to the elderly couple's home 3 doors down. The vehicle slowed dramatically as it approached the wedding parking situation, its driver visibly frustrated as he inched between the rows of cars that had narrowed the passageway. I continued recording as the ambulance was forced to back up and find an alternate route. This was no longer just about my driveway. It was a public safety issue. I made sure to capture every detail, including the timestamp and the ambulance's difficulty. Karen must have noticed me from her yard, because suddenly she was storming down her driveway, her face flushed with anger beneath her carefully applied makeup. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, pointing at my phone. "Documenting violations of city parking ordinances and safety codes," I replied calmly, continuing to record. "Stop filming this instant. This is harassment." Her voice rose to a near shout, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "This is a public street," I responded, "and these cars are creating a safety hazard. An ambulance just had to reroute because it could not get through." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You are just trying to ruin my daughter's special day because you are jealous. This is pathetic." Thomas appeared at Karen's side, summoned by her raising voice. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, glaring at me. "Yes," Karen hissed. "He is harassing our guests and threatening to have their cars towed. I want this documented as a violation of HOA Harmony regulations." Thomas pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of me as if collecting evidence. "You realize this will result in fines, right? The board has approved all parking for today's event." "The board cannot approve violations of city ordinances," I countered, "and they certainly cannot authorize someone to block my private driveway." Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You want to play this game? Fine. But remember, I run this HOA. I decide which violations get reported and which fines get issued. Think very carefully about your next move." With that, she turned and marched back to her celebration, Thomas trailing behind her like an obedient shadow. I stood on the sidewalk, phone still recording, more resolved than ever. This had escalated beyond a simple parking dispute. Karen had made it clear this was about power. I needed legitimate backup. Returning home, I compiled all my evidence, photos, videos, copies of the HOA bylaws, the email exchanges with Karen, and documentation of my driveway boundaries from my property deed. Then I called a real attorney who specialized in property disputes and HOA conflicts. "Can an HOA president authorize someone to park in my private driveway without my consent?" I asked when the lawyer came on the line. "Absolutely not," he responded without hesitation. "That is a clear violation of your property rights. No HOA has jurisdiction over your private driveway regardless of any supposed emergency session." Finally, someone was speaking sense. I explained the full situation, and the attorney agreed to email me an official letter stating my legal rights that I could show to a towing company. The battle lines were drawn. Karen had her HOA power, but I had something stronger, the actual law. Armed with the attorney's letter and my property documentation, I called the towing company again. This time, I spoke with the manager directly and emailed all my evidence while on the phone. "I see," the manager said after reviewing the documents. "This is clearly your private property, and no HOA has the right to authorize usage without your consent. We can send a truck within 30 minutes. A sense of vindication washed over me. "Thank you, I appreciate your help." I checked the time. It was nearly 2 o'clock. The wedding ceremony would be starting soon. Karen's planning schedule, which she had distributed to the entire neighborhood for coordination purposes, indicated that the ceremony would last approximately 45 minutes. The vows themselves would occur around 2:30. A plan formed in my mind. If I timed this correctly, the maximum impact would be achieved with minimal disruption to the actual celebration. This was not about ruining the daughter's wedding. She was an innocent party in her mother's power games. This was about sending a message to Karen that her authority had limits. I watched from my window as guests settled into their seats in Karen's backyard. Music began to play, a string quartet performing a classical piece that drifted through the air. The processional started, perfect timing. At precisely 2:25, a white tow truck turned onto our street. The driver had followed my instructions perfectly, no lights, no backup beeper, just quiet, professional efficiency. He parked directly behind the Lexus and stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Are you the property owner?" he asked as I approached. "Yes, I have all the documentation right here." I handed him the papers, including the attorney's letter. He reviewed everything quickly and nodded. "This is straightforward. That vehicle is illegally parked on your property. I will need you to sign the authorization form, and then we can proceed." I signed the paperwork as the wedding vows began in Karen's backyard. The timing could not have been more perfect. While all eyes were on the bride and groom, the tow operator worked with practiced efficiency, positioning his equipment and preparing to lift the Lexus. The hydraulic system engaged with a low hum, barely audible over the ceremony music. The Lexus rose from my driveway inch by inch, its tires leaving the concrete that they had illegally occupied for hours. I stood watching, recording everything on my phone as evidence of proper procedure being followed. The driver had just secured the vehicle to the flatbed when it happened, a sound that will forever be etched in my memory. A shriek of pure outrage cut through the ceremony, slicing through the minister's words like a knife. "My car, what are you doing to my car?" Karen was running, actually running in her formal dress and heels, down the aisle between the guest chairs, abandoning her position as mother of the bride. Her face was contorted in disbelief and fury as she charged toward my driveway, a parade of confused guests turning in their seats to witness the commotion. "Stop that truck immediately," she screamed, her carefully styled hair coming undone as she ran. The driver, to his credit, remained completely professional. He continued securing the vehicle as Karen reached us, breathing heavily, her face flushed with exertion and rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, looking between me and the driver. "How dare you, during my daughter's wedding?" "I am simply removing an illegally parked vehicle from my private property," I replied calmly, "as is my legal right." This is outrageous," Karen sputtered. "I told you the HOA approved this parking arrangement." "The HOA has no authority over my private driveway," I stated. I have confirmed this with a licensed attorney. Your car was parked illegally, and now it is being legally removed. By this point, several wedding guests had followed Karen to the scene, creating an audience for her humiliation. Thomas pushed through the gathering crowd, phone already in hand. "I am calling the police," he announced loudly. "This is harassment and property theft." "Please do call them," I replied. "I have all the legal documentation ready for their review." The tow truck driver handed Karen a card. "Your vehicle is being taken to our secure lot. The address is on the card. You can claim it during business hours with proper identification and after paying the standard towing and storage fees." Karen stared at the card in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. "You cannot do this. Do you know who I am in this community?" "Yes," I nodded. "You are someone parking illegally on my property who ignored multiple requests to move your vehicle." As if on cue, police sirens sounded in the distance. Thomas must have actually called them. The tow truck driver looked at me questioningly. "You are cleared to proceed," I confirmed. "Everything is properly documented." With a nod, he returned to his truck cab. The Lexus, now fully secured on the flatbed, began to pull away from my driveway. Karen lunged forward as if to physically stop the truck, but a wedding guest, perhaps the only sensible person in her entourage, held her back. "You will regret this," Karen hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "I will make your life in this neighborhood unbearable." I met her gaze steadily. "You already tried that this morning when you took my property without permission and mocked my concerns. Perhaps now we can discuss proper boundaries." 2 police cruisers pulled up, and officers approached our tense standoff. Thomas immediately rushed to them, speaking rapidly and pointing at the departing tow truck. One officer listened while the other came over to hear my side. "Sir, we received a call about a vehicle being illegally towed during a wedding ceremony," the officer said. "Yes, officer," I replied, handing him my folder of documentation. "That vehicle was parked in my private driveway without my permission after I explicitly declined permission. I have the property deed, an attorney's letter confirming my rights, and video evidence of the car being left there against my will." The officer reviewed the documents carefully while Karen argued loudly with his partner. After a few minutes, both officers conferred briefly. "Ma'am," the first officer addressed Karen, "based on the documentation provided, the vehicle was indeed illegally parked on private property. The owner was within his rights to have it towed." Karen's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her usual eloquence deserting her in the face of official validation of my position. But my daughter's wedding," she finally managed. "I am sorry about the timing," the officer replied, though his expression suggested limited sympathy. "But that does not change the legal situation. You can retrieve your vehicle from the impound lot." Karen turned to me, eyes blazing with hatred. "This is not over," she whispered before turning back toward her house, her head held high despite her defeat. The gathered wedding guests began dispersing, murmuring among themselves. For perhaps the first time, they had witnessed someone successfully standing up to Karen's reign of HOA terror. The balance of power had shifted, subtly but significantly. As the police officers returned to their vehicles, one paused beside me. "Neighborhood disputes can get ugly," he commented. "You might want to document any further interactions with that woman." I nodded gratefully. "I intend to." The wedding resumed, though surely changed by the incident. I finally had my driveway back, empty, clear, and unquestionably mine. It was not about the parking space. It was about standing up to a bully who had gone too far. The morning after the wedding, I opened my front door to find an official HOA envelope taped to it. Inside was a formal notice of violation, disturbing community peace and harmony, with a fine of $500. Karen had wasted no time in her retaliation. The notice cited HOA Bylaw Section 12, Paragraph 4. Actions that deliberately disrupt community events or cause public disturbances that negatively impact neighborhood harmony are subject to fines at the board's discretion. It was vague enough to be weaponized for almost any situation. Classic Karen manipulation of the rules. At the bottom was her signature, scratched with such force that it had nearly torn through the paper. I set the notice aside, having anticipated this move. What I had not expected arrived in my email an hour later, a notification from the local police department that a complaint had been filed against me for physical assault during a property dispute. Karen had actually claimed I had pushed her during the towing incident. I immediately called the officer who had been present and explained the situation. "We have body cam footage of the entire interaction," he assured me. "There was clearly no physical contact. This appears to be a false report, which is itself an offense." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your help." That afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it cautiously, half expecting to find Karen with another notice. Instead, it was Robert Chen, an HOA board member I had spoken with perhaps twice since moving in. He looked uncomfortable, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen. "Can I speak with you privately?" he asked in a low voice. I invited him in, curious about this unexpected visit. Once inside, Robert's posture relaxed slightly. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday," he began, "and about the emergency session Karen claims authorized use of your driveway." "Claims," I repeated, nodding his word choice. Robert nodded. There was no emergency session, no vote. Karen simply decided and then told the board she had approval. This confirmation of my suspicions was still shocking to hear. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she has gone too far," Robert said firmly. "Many of us on the board have been intimidated by her for years, afraid to speak up. But falsifying board actions and then filing false police reports crosses a line. Several members are questioning her leadership now." This was an unexpected development, cracks in Karen's power structure. I thanked Robert for his honesty, and he left as carefully as he had arrived, still concerned about being seen. That evening, I forwarded all my documentation to my attorney, along with the new information from Robert. The attorney drafted a formal counter-notice, not only contesting the HOA fine but requesting Karen's removal as president for abuse of power, falsification of board actions, and filing a false police report. Karen's response came swiftly in the form of another community-wide email. "Dear valued neighbors, it saddens me to inform you that our community is facing a troubling situation. A resident among us has demonstrated increasingly hostile and unstable behavior, culminating in a violent and disruptive incident during a family celebration. As your elected HOA president, I remain committed to maintaining the safety and property values of our community despite these challenges. I ask for your support during this difficult time as we address this threat to our neighborhood's harmony. United we stand. Karen Williams, HOA President." The email was masterfully crafted manipulation, vague enough to avoid direct defamation while clearly painting me as dangerous. But something had changed in the neighborhood. Instead of the usual silence, responses began appearing in the email thread. "What specifically happened?" one neighbor asked. "Is this about the car that was towed?" questioned another. The narrative was slipping from Karen's control. Then came a knock at my door. It was Jim Baker from across the street, a quiet man who rarely engaged in HOA matters. "I saw everything yesterday," he said without preamble. "That car was in your driveway all day. You called Karen multiple times. I heard you asking politely for it to be moved." I nodded, surprised by his knowledge of the situation. "I will testify to that at the next HOA meeting," Jim continued. "And I am not the only one. We are tired of her behavior." For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt something that had been missing under Karen's reign: community solidarity. The tide was turning, and Karen's empire was beginning to crumble. 2 weeks after the wedding incident, an unusual notice appeared in everyone's mailbox: announcement of a special HOA meeting to address leadership concerns and community standards. The meeting was called not by Karen, but by a majority of board members. The revolution had begun. The community center was packed that Thursday evening. Neighbors who typically avoided HOA meetings had turned out in unprecedented numbers. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of tension, anticipation, and the excitement that comes with witnessing a long-overdue reckoning. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, a calculated move she had always used to establish dominance. She strode to the front of the room in a tailored blazer with her HOA president pin gleaming on the lapel. But instead of taking her usual seat at the center of the board table, she found Robert occupying the chair. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded loudly. Robert remained calm. As specified in the HOA bylaws, when a majority of board members call a special session, the vice president chairs the meeting if the subject involves review of the president's conduct. Karen's face flushed. "This is highly irregular and unnecessary. I have served this community faithfully for 6 years." "Please take a seat, Karen," Robert said firmly. "This meeting will proceed according to our bylaws." Reluctantly, Karen took an empty chair to the side, her posture rigid with indignation. Robert cleared his throat. "This special session has been called to address concerns regarding leadership conduct and abuse of position within our HOA. Specifically, we will review the complaint filed against President Williams for falsifying board approvals, misuse of HOA authority for personal benefit, and retaliatory actions against residents." A murmur rippled through the audience. Karen's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her purse. "Before we proceed with the complaint review," Robert continued, "we invite community members to share relevant experiences or observations." At first, there was hesitation. Years of Karen's intimidation had conditioned everyone to remain silent. Then a hand raised tentatively from the back. It was Margaret Wilson, a retired schoolteacher who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. "2 years ago," Margaret began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "I was fined $300 for wind chimes on my porch. Karen said they violated noise ordinances. When I checked the bylaws, there was no such restriction. When I contested the fine, I received violation notices for my garden gnomes the very next day." Another hand rose. Michael Torres, a young father who had moved in last year, stood. "I was threatened with eviction proceedings for having unapproved patio furniture. My chairs were the same model as Karen's, just a different color. The approval process mysteriously took 6 months, during which I accumulated fines weekly." One by one, neighbors stood to share their stories. A pattern emerged of selective enforcement, arbitrary rules, and retaliatory actions whenever someone questioned Karen's authority. Throughout these testimonies, Karen repeatedly tried to interrupt, but Robert firmly enforced the meeting procedures. "She is manufacturing these stories," Karen finally burst out. "This is a coordinated attack on my character by people who simply do not want to follow community standards." "You will have your opportunity to respond," Robert assured her. "Now, regarding the specific complaint that prompted this meeting, the unauthorized use of a resident's private driveway during your daughter's wedding. We would like to hear from the resident involved." All eyes turned to me as I stood. I had prepared carefully for this moment, knowing it was not just about my driveway, but about restoring balance to our community. "I have documentation I would like to share with the board," I began, approaching the table with my folder of evidence. "This includes text messages showing that I explicitly informed Karen I could not attend the wedding due to a medical appointment for my father, making clear I would need my driveway accessible." I displayed screenshots on the projector, including Karen's dismissive responses and the laughing emoji she had sent when I discovered her car in my driveway. When I attempted to resolve the situation, I was told an emergency board session had authorized the use of my driveway. I have since learned from board members that no such session or vote ever occurred. Karen shot to her feet. "That is a lie. I consulted with available board members informally as permitted in section." "That provision applies to emergency maintenance issues, not private property appropriation," Robert interrupted, pointing to the relevant bylaw section. I continued presenting evidence: the photos of the car in my driveway, the note Karen had left, documentation of my attempts to contact her before calling a tow truck, and finally, the video of the towing itself, which clearly showed no physical contact despite Karen's police report claiming assault. As the video played, showing Karen running from the wedding ceremony to confront the tow truck, scattered laughter rippled through the audience. Her carefully cultivated image of neighborhood authority was crumbling before everyone's eyes. When the presentation concluded, Robert called for board discussion. The conversation was brief and pointed. Karen attempted to defend her actions, claiming she had acted in the community's best interest to ensure a successful neighborhood event. Her arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence showing clear abuse of power. "According to our bylaws," Robert announced after the discussion, "we will now vote on the motion to remove Karen Williams from her position as HOA president for multiple violations of leadership standards and abuse of position." The vote was conducted by paper ballot to prevent intimidation. When Robert announced the results, unanimous for removal, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Karen sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. "This is not over," she finally said, rising from her chair. "I have given everything to this community. You will regret this decision when your property values plummet under amateur leadership." With that final threat, she gathered her belongings and strode from the room, heels clicking aggressively against the floor. The door slammed behind her with theatrical force. Robert waited for the echo,